Hello, welcome to the second International Burnout Awareness Week. We're here today live for our third panel in English. The second International Burnout Awareness Week will take place between November 29 until tomorrow, December 3rd, and will be broadcast live here on YouTube. There will be more than 20 panels from over 5 countries in English and Portuguese with specialists on the subject and people who have lived and are living through the syndrome. The purpose of this event is to responsibly raise awareness around burnout and help eliminate the stigma surrounding it, in addition to intensifying the dissemination of its causes, consequences, and treatments. The panels are divided into tracks, including health and well-being, culture and society, the role of organizations, and burnout stories. In the first edition in 2020, the Awareness Week has raised over 300 subscribers and panelists from 5 countries, broadcasting more than 15 hours of content. The content is not a substitute for appropriate treatment by a qualified healthcare professional. When listening to the stories, if you feel like you need help, you can feel free to get in touch with a professional. In this event, we encourage the conscious consumption of content. Watch us whenever you can, the way you can, for as long as you can. And we don't expect you to be on top of everything in life and in this Awareness Week. Some concepts may be complex or triggering for you. If you need to take a break and breathe, that's fine. The talks will be available in these very same links for whenever you can. The event is sponsored by Zen Club, a Brazilian online mental health platform that has a network of experts such as psychologists, psychoanalysts, and therapists. We're also grateful for the support of Instituto Bem-Estar, a Brazilian nonprofit organization that aims to promote health of the mind. And I'm joined here by my dearest idol on burnout, my reference, the one and only Dr. Geri Puleo. She is a professor and a speaker, and she has over 20 years of experience on burnout, work-life balance, and I welcome you with all my heart, Geri. You're so very welcome.
Mutual, dear. Feeling is mutual.
So good to see you.
Oh, great to see. Isn't technology wonderful?
Oh my
Considering that I'm in the United States and you're in the Netherlands.
Yes, and most of the people watching us are in Brazil.
Oh, well, hello, Brazilians.
Yeah, I'm so glad to see you here, Dr. Geri.
So good to see you. Thank you.
For whoever doesn't know that yet, I have started studying burnout and reading about burnout after a TED Talk by Dr. Geri that I've seen 4 years ago. Yes, and it has over 500,000 views already on YouTube.
Yeah, it's surprising. Yeah.
Yes, and it's and she talks about burnout and PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. I watched that and it made so much sense to what was happening to me. Like nothing else that I had heard or read in recent times. And because of that, I felt compelled to study a little bit more. So if I'm here today, it's because people like you have been doing that. So
well, and you also had the courage to reach out to me. And
I did.
And we connected immediately.
Yes.
Absolutely. So I'm so glad that it was helpful to you. And, you know, we've gone over, I think I just passed 550,000 views.
Wow.
And we're getting about anywhere between 1,500 and 2,000 views a week, which to me is very gratifying. It's very humbling. But considering that TED Talk was recorded 7 years ago,
yeah,
it's upsetting that to me that so many people are still burned out.
Yeah.
And so anyone that I can help by my research that gives some kind of a structure to it so that people realize, number one, you're not alone. Because when you're burned out, there's a real victimization and you feel like everybody else has it together and what's wrong with me. But I think what the pandemic has taught everyone in the world is that stress is real. Stress has serious consequences. And especially within the workplace, changes need to be made. We're not going back to business as usual. And that's scary. But we have the chance to create a new normal, which is much healthier physically, emotionally, psychologically, and dare I say, even spiritually. So it's a stressful time, but it's a pretty exciting time too, because we can shift our destinies.
Yes, yes, it is. So today we're going to talk about why employees burn out,
Yeah,
what leaders can do about it. We're going to recap the 10 factors that
sure.
organizations cause burnout. And we're also bringing some new research that Dr. Geri is going to share with us, which is an honor to have you sharing
My
with us
pleasure.
new insights on the recovery. So let's start with the why.
Yeah.
Why does it happen?
Well, I focus primarily on workplace burnout because my PhD is not in psychology. My PhD is in business with a focus on change management. And when I was doing my research for my dissertation, I was focusing on what causes and maintains burnout during transformational organizational change. And back when I did it, it was really funny because all of the change management literature would have one line stating, and employees may burn out. That was it. There was no research on it. So I started really looking into what's going on and what causes the employee burnout. And I identified through my research 10, like a top 10 list of what organizations do that creates burnout. And that was pretty radical back then, because I think one of the biggest misconceptions about burnout, and we've talked about this before, um, it's aligned with the victimization that you feel. You feel that if you're burned out, you have a maladaptive response to stress, that you just can't cut it. But in reality, there's certain things that go on within the workplace that can create burnout. Now, what's interesting is even though the BDOC model or the burnout during organizational change model, I call it BDOC because it's just a lot shorter.
Yes.
Um, even though it was talking about organizational change, what I found out when I did my TED Talk was that the model really resonated with people, even if their company wasn't going through organizational change. So that made me feel good because it made it more of a valid and reliable model. But do you want me to go over real quickly what BDOC
Yes.
says? Okay. BDOC, what I found is most people who were burning out start out with high hopes. And in fact, Freudenberger, who's the Freudian psychoanalyst who first identified the burnout phenomenon, mentioned that burnout is often the result of unmet expectations, that the reality doesn't jive with what you expected. So what I found is people normally start out with a great deal of hope, and then through a combination of personality traits, organizational traits, and even certain physical manifestations of the stress, they start descending through frustration, anger, apathy before a full-blown burnout. And one of the things I want to mention here is, burnout is now being bandied around about everything.
Yeah.
Oh, I have Zoom burnout. I have chocolate burnout. I have, everything's burnout now.
Yeah.
But true burnout for anyone who's experienced it is a total depletion of who you are. There are physical manifestations. In my original research, 15% of the people whom I interviewed were diagnosed with cancer, like 6 to 12 months after their burnout episode. It also feels there's certain psychological things. There's a certain amount of cynicism. There's a total exhaustion. In fact, the reason why Freudenberger called it burnout was because in his patients, they were like the burned out shell of a building. And I keep thinking of that iconic photo of 9/11 where it's just that one wall and all the ashes around it. That's what burnout feels like. So the good news is if you can sleep it off in a weekend and feel better, you're probably not burned out. But once people,
Thanks for saying that.
yeah, and that's important. That's really
Yes.
important to know. Then what I found is when people were recovering from burnout, and this is something really important for business leaders, they physically or psychologically remove themselves from the stressor. Psychologically, it's through presenteeism, where they're there at work, just their body's there, but their minds are someplace else. It can also be through false cures, alcohol, um, recreational drugs, over-the-counter drugs. It can even be the work itself to just try to escape. But the big thing is the physical removal. And for business leaders, you need to be aware that what I've found is well over 90 to 95% of the people whom I've interviewed quit their jobs. Many of them quit their careers and went through that very difficult, yep, exactly, went through that very difficult stage of career change, which nobody really likes that because it's a kind of a no man's land. But after the physical and psychological withdrawal, they started taking the time for self-reflection as well as self-acceptance. So they didn't blame themselves anymore. They started looking at it. And the result was a revised psychological contract with work, which is a hoity-toity way of saying, you want me to do this, employer, I will, but I expect this from you. And so they have a more feeling of control. The problem is during the recovery, which takes at least 2 years, and in the gender differences in burnout research that I'm currently conducting, I just finished with the women, um, 2 years could be short. Some of the women whom I interviewed were 5 years out, and they still weren't normal again. During that time period, this is why it's similar to PTSD, is it can bounce you right back into the frustration, anger, apathy, or full-blown burnout. And that's what I call residual burnout. And it's if you don't really actively engage in self-reflection and acceptance, even though you left your job or changed careers, when you go into the new employment situation, it triggers you again.
Yeah.
Or you see yourself doing the same actions or having the same expectations or demands on yourself that you just burn out all over again. Now, I will say that saying if you recover from burnout, you're going to have a revised psychological contract with work, right? That sounds really exciting and sexy, right? It doesn't. But what I found with the women whom I've interviewed who have fully recovered, there was a major transformational change that was similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs and self-actualization. That blew my mind because I've been a Maslow fan ever since
Yeah.
college, which was many, many years ago. But that's exciting because suddenly you feel more in control of your destiny. You're willing to say no
Mhm.
without regret, which is a
Mhm.
big thing, and you're a lot happier with your life. So that is basically the BDOC model, and this is one of the first platforms where I've been talking about the tail to the BDOC model so that there is a transformation at the end, almost even self-actualization. In fact, many of the people whom I've interviewed said, I hated every minute of burnout, but it was critical in my life, and I wouldn't trade it in for anything because I became more authentic and more me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the BDOC model.
Yeah, and you're describing my last few years of my life.
Exactly.
As I think our first interview, I had a podcast. So whoever's watching, I had a
right.
podcast, the
That's
Better
right.
Achiever podcast from my first project in English.
Mhm.
And we did an interview. I interviewed Dr. Geri 3.5 years ago, I think already.
Oh my God.
And
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
yes. And as she was explaining the BDOC and all the in the stages and what happens, I was looking at her and thinking, how can she describe my life if I haven't said that to her yet? And several other people who have listened to it have told me the same thing as well.
Yeah.
And that's the power of research, right? Is that
Right.
you
Well,
can
and that's the
define the
power
pattern.
of qualitative research. Because I
Yes.
do grounded theory. No, I'm not going to go into a diatribe right now about, different research methodologies.
Yeah.
But basically, when you do quantitative research, like surveys and things like that, you have a hypothesis that is being tested. Okay, so you come in with certain preconceived notions.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with qualitative research, there is no hypothesis.
Mhm.
And when you're dealing with grounded theory, you have one or two what they call grantor questions, and then these subsets of questions to help you really dig. So anything that you develop with the resulting theory comes from the people who've experienced it. And you take those experiences and then you conceptualize them, and that gives the validity and reliability to the final theory. And I know some people have said, it's like you read my mind. How did you know it? Well, I humbly say it wasn't me. It was having some fantastic participants who were that honest to share
Yes,
those things with me. And so if I can use those experiences, all confidential and anonymous, of
of
course,
course.
to help other people, it's important. And I think, you know, in terms of the workplace, COVID has really put a spotlight on mental health in the workplace, uh, employee wellness, stress, and all of those kinds of things. And employers now have to do something about it, because here in the US, we've got the great resignation and people are
Yes.
quitting like crazy. And I think they realize it's just not worth it. It's
Yeah.
just not worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because there's so many people from Brazil watching now, and I always say that Brazil is a mirror, is a late mirror from the US. So whatever happens in the US, it's gonna happen in Brazil in some
Yeah.
way, because the way our society is built in Brazil
Mhm.
has a lot of aspirational factors on, especially the corporate world. The corporate world wants to be America. And so whatever is happening there, we can anticipate and see and learn from that if we are wise, which not everyone is, but at least we have the opportunity to do so.
Exactly.
Um,
Let me throw
so
something out to
yeah,
you. A lot of reasons why people don't take any actions is because, number one, when it's happening to them, they don't know what's going on.
yeah,
Something's wrong. And to all the listeners out there, sleep problems are big. And what I have found is that between 2 and 3 a.m., regardless of country, is when people wake up and they experience what is called in Buddhist the monkey mind. And it's just these racing thoughts, and you can't fall back asleep, and you're tired and you're exhausted. And that seems to be the witching hour, you know, across countries. But it's, you know, think about it. If employees are exhausted, they're going to be cranky. They're not going to be able to problem solve or make good decisions. Um, and, you know, ultimately, that's not good for them. It's not good for corporate performance, and it's really lousy for the customers they have to work with.
yeah,
So it, you know, it's really important that companies have the courage to look at themselves and look in the mirror without judgment, without resistance to what is going on in the workplace that may be contributing to the level of stress in their employees.
yeah. So walk us through the 10 factors from
Sure.
BDoc, and then afterwards I want to hear as well, because we've been talking publicly at least once a year, and kind of roughly once a year. And
Exactly.
we have our chats that sometimes it takes 3 or 4 hours. We're talking for three or
That's
four
very
hours
true.
but
That's
it
very
has been
true.
a while. We will catch up soon.
Exactly.
But we've talked in last year's awareness week, and since then, and since COVID, as you said, we were just talking backstage about how companies worldwide are having to face the fact that mental health is an issue and is a priority, and that burnout exists, and it's not an individual problem, it's an
Right.
organizational and cultural
Exactly.
problem. So first of all, what are these 10 factors, and how are organizations reacting to that currently in the US?
Okay. I want to throw one thing out.
Yeah.
The US is way behind in identifying burnout. In Europe, it is identified. Sometimes it goes under the label of chronic fatigue syndrome, sometimes it's adrenal fatigue, but it is recognized. It's not recognized in the US. It's still viewed as something's wrong with the individual, and what we'll do is we'll give you time management training.
Oh my God.
You know, it's like, okay, yeah, that's not what's going on.
Yeah.
So that's why I think these 10, the top 10 list, and the top 10 list of organizational factors that contribute to burnout, are ranked based on the frequency of the participants. Okay. Now, one thing you have to realize is I didn't give them a list and ask them this.
Mm-hmm.
It was just through broader questions that they shared this. One of the number 10 on the top 10 list is not having any vision or direction. And I think that's what happened with the pandemic to a lot of US companies. They weren't sure what to do. Suddenly, people are working from home. They didn't have any guidelines on working from home. Okay. And employees became stressed. Number 9 is really upsetting. It's unethical or illegal requests. And I've talked to a lot of colleagues, and we're kind of appalled with what's going on in businesses. Let's not even talk about American politics,
Yeah.
but things that are unethical or the Machiavellian that the ends justifies the means. And to
Mm-hmm.
people, especially who are very conscientious and have high values, to try to do something that feels smarmy or not right creates this cognitive dissonance where your actions are not related at all to how you're feeling.
Yeah.
Number 8 is poor communication. And this I see a lot in companies. It's like, we talk to our employees. We have an employee newsletter. Whoopee. That's a one-way communication stream. And if we have learned nothing from social media, it's not enough just to put it out there in an ad. You want to engage your customers. It has to be a back and forth. But to really be able to have that kind of open dialogue requires a culture of trust, which unfortunately many companies don't have. Number 7, and this is what always surprises people because they think it's going to be much higher, is work overload. Now, that said, there's a thing called karoshi in Japan, which is literally death by overwork. And they have found, on average, if somebody is working over 60 hours per week and they're found dead at their desk, they look into karoshi because they were working too many hours. Here in the U.S., it's, oh, Tom died on his desk, move the dead body, put Joe in his place, but it's his problem. But I think a lot of it is not the number of hours, although 60 throughout the research has been that tipping point. If you're consistently working over 60 hours a week, you don't have time to relax. You probably don't have good self-care that you can shut it off.
Mm-hmm.
So work overload is definitely one of them. And this is, I think, why the burnout levels have increased during the pandemic. Because at first, I get to work from home. It's going to be so great. Oh, this is great. I can be in my jammies. But what they started doing was like the commute to and from work, which could be their time to decompress.
Yeah.
They started working during those hours, and they
Yeah.
found that employees were working more hours than before. So the work overload is something. Number 6 is overemphasizing the return on investment, or ROI.
Mm-hmm.
When everything's about the money, employees are viewed as cogs in a wheel or lines on a balance sheet, and the organization loses its humanity. Okay. Number 5 is a lack of resources, and we see this all the time. We want you to do this, this, this. Okay, you're going to work from home. Oh, you don't have a separate space to work. Oh, you don't have good internet access. That's your problem.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to supply those resources is one of the ways to overcome the burnout. And also, so many companies are trying to be lean. They don't have enough
Mm-hmm.
workers. And so it's the survivor syndrome, like after a layoff, they end up working more hours and it's more and more stressful. And some companies, if they overemphasize the return on investment, are like, hey, we're getting this stuff done. Let's not
Yeah.
worry that we're killing our employees, but we're getting this stuff done and it's costing us less money.
Mm-hmm.
Number 4 is politics or sabotage. This is, when you're doing everything right, but then someone steps in. I saw in one organization an absolute coup that took place that I was appalled, and nobody else saw it. And
Mm-hmm.
we've talked about this before because, the children's fairy tale about the emperor's new clothes.
Mm-hmm.
that there's one little boy walking down the street and everybody else is saying, oh, look, there's this, the emperor has a beautiful new coat. And I shouldn't say little boy, let's say the child is sitting there going, he's naked. He's buck naked, and nobody listened to him. And I think this is one of the problems with a lot of organizations is they don't want to look in the mirror and see what they could be doing to contribute to burnout. The top three get into some really personal things. Number three is negative coworkers. And there's been a lot of classic studies on this, that if you come in and you're all enthusiastic and you're open, but the people in your department are negative, been there, done that, it's not going to work, it's not going to help. Eventually, the person who was so optimistic loses that. And then that leads to their stress, because people who are optimistic, like someone who's interviewing me right now, you want to do something wonderful. You want it, you believe in it, you're energized. And when that is dismissed, it can be emotionally devastating,
Yeah.
And a lot of times I found that people will say, is it me? Do I have too high of expectations? What is it? And then we have a culture also where they're talking about getting more and more and more and more, which is also a cultural stressor. Number two is a perceived lack of organizational caring. Now, I'm working with some companies right now where I'm actually doing a survey rather than qualitative interviews. And I've got statements in there, and once you take this survey, it can assess your burnout risk as either low, moderate, or very high risk. I was amazed at how many employees say they seldom do things that are right by the employees. And how do you talk to someone about that? Let's face it, if you go up to your boss and say, you don't care about me, they're going to look at you like, don't worry, but just go back and do your job. So that lack of organizational caring. And I think what's important for companies to realize is caring is like different love languages. Employees perceive caring by the organization in different ways. Sometimes in one situation, there was a minor change that was made that the manager would just come in and say good morning to the employees, and their morale shot up. Because before, this manager just ignored them and went to their desk or their office. So a lack of organizational caring. And this is getting into the soft, squishy, subjective soft skills that nobody wants to talk about, that everybody recognizes. If you don't have them in the workplace, you don't have a successful company. And the number one reason for burnout based on organizational stressors is poor leadership. And a lot of times people are promoted into leadership roles when they really should not be in leadership roles, or that's the only career path they have to continue. Hold on. We knew that was going to happen. We knew that was going to happen. I obviously have a Motorola phone, in case you didn't hear that. Yeah, I have people say, oh, so you got a Motorola, huh? That's nice. But I think that employees look to their leaders. So if the leader is emailing or texting employees at 1:00 in the morning and saying, you don't have to deal with this right now, but could you do this tomorrow? And then at 8:00 in the morning, they text you again. Okay, I just got a voicemail.
This panel is brought to you by Motorola.
Wouldn't that be great, huh? Yes. But they're still setting a precedent, because employees know what's expected by watching the leaders. Leaders have to walk the talk. If they say, I need you to take care of yourself and not stress out, but they're slugging back a couple of martinis at lunch, and they're coming in at 7 in the morning, and they're there until 10 o'clock at night, or they're emailing or texting you at 1:00 in the morning, what the leader is saying is, this is what you have to do in this organization in order to succeed. And in fact, if I can give one story from one of the women whom I interviewed, she had just been promoted. She had worked her butt off this one year. Wasn't around her family, very, very high stress. and she was promoted to a vice president. She was one of the youngest VPs in the company. She then took a sabbatical. This was not in an educational institution. This was with the for-profit corporation. And she thought about this is what it takes for me to become a VP and stay as a VP. It's not worth it. She eventually quit.
This reminds me, I don't know if you have watched the phenomena of Netflix Squid Game, the TV show.
No, I haven't watched it. It's on my to watch list.
Everyone has talked about it for like exhaustively a month. So it's a Korean TV show that's a game that it's like a Hunger Games but for grown-ups, and you have the series of games that people who are not among the top performers are literally murdered. And so there is one person who eventually wins, and there's a huge prize at the end of it, which is it's several millions of dollars. And all of the people who go to the game, they are in terrible debt. So they all really need that money, and they're all desperate, and they have the feeling that there's nothing else, there's no hope other than that game. So I either do that or I literally die anyway, so I might as well just do that. The person who wins, after winning, so there's a small spoiler alert. I'm not gonna go
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, it's a minor spoiler alert. I'm not gonna say which is which, but the person who eventually wins doesn't use the money, lives on the street for a year. And I was watching, I didn't watch, I skipped through most of the episodes because it's so violent. And one of the things that happens after you have a burnout, people who are already sensitive become even more to especially violence in this thing. So I couldn't watch it.
I'll tell you, that's a great point.
Yeah.
That's a great point, because it is true. People who burn out can be hypersensitive, until they get through that recovery. So that's an excellent point, Carol.
And what happens is, so just the whole thing, but I read about it because I understood, and one of the reasons why people are talking about it, it's because it's a metaphor on capitalism, and a metaphor on how the world works. That the workplace is this game where you need to just go over. Yep. And I identified in such a weird way. I related to this character because to the people who have gone through what the person in your research has gone through, you get to the top and then you realize, I'm winning this game, but this game is rigged, and this game is disturbing, and it's so unfair that it feels unfair that I have won this game.
Yeah.
So it feels sad that I have won this game. And this is another type of it also causes burnout in a way, which is how can I be here having to do all of this and having to go through all of these factors that you just mentioned.
And that's a really, really good point. And that's why organizational leaders must, and you know me, I'm not big on commands.
Yeah.
But organizational leaders must recognize burnout, and they must do something about it. And not these little quick fixes. Because what I'm finding is it may take at least a year, if not more, to really get down to that low, full-blown burnout.
Mm-hmm.
And if it takes at least 2 years to recover, you're talking a huge chunk of somebody's life.
Yes.
And organizational leaders, we have this efficiency mantra. It goes back to emphasizing the return on the investment and, maximize that return. And organizational leaders create the culture, and cultural change ain't going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a quarter. It's not even going to happen in a year. In fact, most studies have shown that if it is a transformational change, not something transactional, like we just got a new software in here and it's disruptive and everybody has to learn it. But if it's transformational and it's cultural, it can take 10 years to fully be enculturated that it becomes, this is the way we do things here. And there's a no man's land between what was and what can be, and it's very difficult. So I think, okay, I'm going on a rant now, but
Please.
I think in business school, most of the soft skills classes, such as leadership, management that is not quantitative management, even human resources, are either not offered or are electives.
Mm-hmm.
When the reality is, it's the companies that excel in these soft skills that are the companies that usually win, that
If
have
you
an easier time recruiting employees, retaining employees. And that means they retain their customers. Their return on investment is higher, but it's bringing the human back into the workplace. And I think the pandemic, when the fear was, I catch COVID, I might die, or someone I love might die,
Yeah.
or I know someone who died. That, I think, was like the universe hitting everybody in the side of the head and say, it's got to change with what's going on in business. So I think that talking about this movie is really important, because you can visualize and see what really can happen. And I mean, look at all the companies that have, due to the Great Resignation, have to limit their hours or shut their doors because they can't find workers. So, people are finally beginning to say, I need something different. And I think organizational leaders need to recognize that. In fact, I was on a call with a client, and I mentioned, you have to look at the impact of COVID. And they looked at me and said, COVID hasn't had any impact on anything.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sitting
That's a
there.
denial.
I started doing like a little twitch after a while. It's like, oh, okay. So how do it's the blinders. It's the blinders.
And so, how has it been in the last few months?
Yeah.
From the companies that you've been to, that have been talking to, how is management perceiving this change? Apart
Well,
from the
obviously,
ones who are still in denial.
yeah, obviously the clients that I have, and I always applaud them for this, because they are courageous enough and progressive enough to really address the problem. And so what I've been doing with these surveys, we then follow up with a session with the leadership team where we're talking about the findings. And this is when my geek hat comes on and doing all the analysis and everything. And then because the way the survey is set up, it's, what are certain personality traits, and what are certain things going on in the organization. So through that survey and being able to analyze it, I can say, it seems like 58% of your employees feel that the organizational leaders don't care. So we need to look at that. But what's really good is 90% believe that there is a strong vision, which is, so it makes it easier, because to suddenly go through that list of 10 stressors, it's a monumental task.
Yeah.
So through this new service that I'm offering, or product, I'm not quite sure what you want to call it, you can really see what you're doing well, what you really need help with, and you can start focusing on that. And so for the companies that I work with, they've already made that decision to move forward. But that's not to say there's no resistance that comes up, like, well, I don't believe that.
Yeah.
But fortunately, nobody has said, who said that? I want the names of those employees. We're going to do something about it. None of them have said that at all.
That's really good.
Yeah.
So you've spoiled me before we started with the recent finding and a recent I don't know how to call that, but a recent composition that you have been doing
Right.
about another trifecta
Exactly.
related to burnout.
Yeah, I have a
So
thing about threes, obviously.
yes,
I'm not quite sure why.
it's a
But
natural balance, I think.
oh, it's so zen.
Yeah, I
It's
have
our
two
own zen club.
siblings.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, I have two siblings, and my mother said that someone else told her when she had me, because I'm the youngest one,
Uh-huh.
that someone told her, "Oh, three is a very balanced number, so it's good that you have
Yeah.
three kids or something." So I think there's something
Oh, that's good.
spiritual or balance or harmony with the tree. So I
Yeah,
think
there
you're good.
probably is. There
You're good
probably
with
is.
the tree.
Well, the first three was my very, very first model, and that was before I even created BDoc, and it was called the Burnout Triumvirate. And we've kind of alluded to this already. It's, there are certain personality traits that make you more predisposed. Based on my most recent research, it's the type, it's the overachievers, not the high achievers. It's the overachievers, that it's never enough, that they never celebrate what they've done. And this aligns with what Freudenberg said, that the very first stage is a compulsion to prove. There's something, we're talking compulsion here.
Yeah.
And many companies want that from employees because they feel it's urgency. But the overachiever, especially when they're also people pleasers, is a deadly combination. What I did find, interestingly, is that most of the people whom I've interviewed don't identify as perfectionists. They kind of know when something is good enough. And so it's not just, but perfectionism can also lead to burnout. Also, there's the 10 workplace stressors that we just talked about. And it only seems when people start having physical manifestations of the stress that they take it seriously. And I think there is also a lot of shame and guilt that people who are experiencing burnout feel. They feel that it's all their fault. Everybody else seems to be okay. One woman I interviewed was in a director position, and there was a company town hall where they were all sharing. And she had been, really burned out. The physical manifestations, it was like almost every one of them. And she was young. This wasn't an old geezer like me. And she said, I think I'm burned out. And she explained it. And she thought, well, let's kiss my job goodbye. There were a few dozen people afterwards who came up and said, thank you. I thought it was just me.
Yeah.
And, the physical manifestations, one woman was grinding her teeth so much, she got bone spurs in her jaw. And you can't repair that.
Yeah.
But the physical symptoms, people can say, oh, yes, I have, I've got irritable bowel syndrome. I'm, having heart problems. But that's more acceptable than saying I'm burned out. In fact, what I found is many people, and maybe some of the people who are listening have found this out, that when they go to family or friends or even coworkers, they're dismissed. It's like, suck it up. This is just the way life is, going back to the movie that you were talking about.
Yeah.
But that's the burnout triumvirate. Now, switching it to the happier three, I discovered in this most recent research what I'm calling the burnout recovery trifecta. Okay.
Nice.
I'm wondering how many more 3 words I'm going to be able to come up with. But the burnout recovery trifecta. The key to overcoming burnout is boundaries. But to tell someone to just don't care as much, which, believe it or not, that is what Freudenberger said in his book on women and burnout. It's just don't care so much. I went a little crazy over that, but we'll let it go. But he does have a point. The ability to say no, that little 2-letter word, no, is powerful to avoiding and overcoming burnout. But the problem is you can't go from not having boundaries to overnight having boundaries. Or you'll look at someone who asks you to do something, you go, no, is that okay? That's not a boundary, okay?
Yeah.
You're also going to get people who will get angry at you
Yeah.
because, especially if you're a people pleaser, you said yes to everything. So what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
And what I found is for people to get to their boundaries, there's 2 different pathways. One of the things that we're hearing a lot is you need to meditate. You need to be more mindful. You just need to let it go. Well, just letting go is extremely difficult for most people. And in fact, if you tell a hyperactive overachiever to sit and meditate for 5 minutes, they're going to get really upset and they're going to blame themselves with, what's wrong with me? I can't even sit still for 5 minutes. See, it is me. It is me. And it adds more stress. And then, of course, overachievers are like, well, I'm going to meditate and attain nirvana.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to happen, in a week.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I love about Buddhism. It's this whole long journey and the acceptance and all that. For people who tend to be more self-reflective in general, that's a really good pathway for them to get to the boundaries, but they still need to do other things. For other people who, as I said, might be more active, um, what I found is people who were physically active during the burnout, their exercise regime just went out the window. They don't exercise. So just taking the time for self-care to exercise or even just to have physical activity. Now, some companies are saying everybody goes for a walk at lunchtime. To someone who is not physically active, it's like, really? I don't want to do that. And I think you had said to me years ago that, going out and doing a workout is not exactly your idea of a good time.
Exactly. It hasn't changed.
And it still hasn't changed. Well, what I found to get to those boundaries, eventually those two paths of meditation and mindfulness and exercise or physical activity cross over. So
Mm-hmm.
that they may start with the exercise or physical activity, but then they engage in more of the self-reflection, mindfulness, meditation, which makes them better able to create the boundaries. Similarly, people who start with the meditation or mindfulness, once they start getting calmer, they start having a need to move more. And as I said, it's not, doing a heavy workout or Tai Bo or whatever the newest phase is. Sometimes it's just taking a walk,
Yeah.
and then they start adding more of that into their life so that they create the boundaries. So self-care is critical for an individual to recover. But what I found pretty consistently from the original research and the current research is that, as I said, 90 to 95% or more of my participants quit their jobs. And if they were the overachievers, and especially if they were in a position of leadership or authority, the company lost a really major asset. And, it's difficult to find the time to take care of yourself. And because I think here in the US, I'm not sure in other countries, but I think it's similar. We have this Puritan work ethic, and we have an addiction to busyness.
Yeah.
As long as I'm moving, I'm doing something.
Mm-hmm.
There's an old joke about, a guy sitting in his office and he's not doing anything. And the boss comes by his door. This is when we weren't working from home, and says, "What are you doing?" And the employee says, "I'm thinking." And the boss says, "Well, stop thinking and get back to work."
Yeah.
But, you need to take that time. And I think it also has to do with a lot of self-awareness. What works for
Mm-hmm.
you? And this is what makes recovery so difficult. What works for one person might be stressful to somebody else.
Yeah.
And this is not saying it's the individual's responsibility, because the employers, the company, which a company and an organization doesn't exist, it's not a live entity that breathes or anything else. Anything the company does was made by decisions from people.
Yeah.
We need to get back into that and to be able to train managers so that they can see when an employee is stressed out, because most people deny it. That's a big part of burnout. I'm not burned out. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing wrong with me. Employers have to see that. Here in the US, we have HIPAA and privacy concerns, so you have to kind of watch it. But I think if employers take a look at what they're doing and really asking themselves, is this working? Is this
Mm-hmm.
helping us or hindering us? Because, you know, uh, organizations and corporations have to make a profit. I'm not against that. But if they really want to be efficient and effective, you better take care of your employees, because they're your only non-duplicatable competitive advantage. Everything else you've got, processes, products, whatever, can be reverse engineered by your competitors. And if they can do it at a lower price, then they're going to do it. But what are people asking for now? I want to go to a store and have a clerk who is nice to me and can help me with what I want. And by the same token, sometimes, just being mindful as part of the burnout recovery trifecta is when someone does something nice for you, tell them.
Yes.
People don't give enough recognition, but yet they want recognition.
Mhm.
And the other thing is, when you create boundaries, a lot of times it can be in the form of leaving your job. It can also be severing toxic relationships. And the people who don't understand you and were not there when you burned out, you need to really ask yourself, are these people helping me in my life or not?
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that in a transactional way, like, are they helping me to get my
Yeah.
goals? But do they give my life meaning?
Mhm.
So, there's a lot. So it's meditation or mindfulness, exercise or physical activity, which leads to the creation and the ability to sustain healthy boundaries.
Awesome.
I was
Amazing.
really happy with that point.
Yeah.
Really happy with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And last year, I think we have covered a little bit. So if you haven't watched last year's panel after this one, you can go back and watch it, because you also, after studying burnout, you have experienced it
Oh
yourself.
yeah. Yeah.
And how is it for you nowadays, this post burnout
Well,
life
you know
of being
what's really
busy and doing things and accomplishing things
well,
and taking care of yourself?
I let go of everything. I literally did. I did a Marie Kondo, and I got rid of, I am not exaggerating, 70% of what I owned. And if none of you are familiar with Marie Kondo, she's what is it? The magic of tidying up, or the
Yeah.
magic power of tidying up. Because we keep so much stuff that we don't need. What triggered me to do that was my father had died. And my father, I thought, was very organized, but he was a pack rat. When I realized that between the stuff at his house and my house, I had 12 dozen wine glasses. No individual needs 12 dozen wine glasses. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought, this is crazy. And I got rid of everything. And with the Marie Kondo method, it sounds hokey as hell. I mean, it really does. But you touch first of all, you take everything in a specific category and you put it on the floor in a room. So if you've got clothing, it's not just going drawer by drawer. It's every drawer, everything in the closet, everything in your bedroom, in storage, whatever it is, and you put it on the floor. First of all, it's disgusting when you see how much stuff you have.
Mhm,
You know.
mhm.
Secondly, you touch everything, and she says, "Does it give you joy?" Now, I've said this before. I'm a practicing Buddhist, so that doesn't faze me. But for some people, it's like, really,
Mhm.
really. But what I found is, I remember there was some clothing that I wore when I taught at this one university, which was a very, very bad experience.
Yeah.
And I touched it, and it was literally like, ooh. And it's like, get rid of that,
Yeah.
And what I did is I donated everything because the stuff was still in good shape. And that made me feel good. And, getting rid of things was, I think, really important. I also got rid of a lot of so called friends
Mhm,
who I realized weren't there for me.
mhm.
One of the things that I discovered is I had, and we've never talked about this, but I had relationships with a lot of narcissists. And
Yeah.
if you've
Oh.
done any research with narcissists, it's like,
Ooh.
"Mm, yeah, that's a whole nother
Yeah.
topic." And so it's getting rid of those things and realizing what it is that I need for me, without apology.
Mhm.
And I'm a meditator. I meditate once or twice a day. My morning routine is body, mind, spirit. So, the spirit is the meditation. The body is, I do exercise. Okay. um, and doing what I enjoy doing. And the third thing is mind, that having that constant, continuous, lifelong learning is really important.
Yeah.
And for meditation, I do chakra meditation, and it's very important for the alignment for me. Um, you can't think your way through chakra meditation. Trust me. You literally, and it's really interesting, you feel an absolutely letting go and everything. I just read an article this morning. They were talking about theta brainwaves
Mhm.
that are very powerful at reducing stress, and they occur during meditation, and they can even last after meditation. So that's important. And then also being realistic to say, something's stressing me out. What is it specifically? Because
Mhm.
there are things that happen that are triggers from what happened in the past, and I get
Yeah.
an immediate reaction. And many people have said this, but listen to your body. If you're waking up every night between 2 and 3 a.m., if your stomach's upset, if you find yourself uh, stress eating, if you're snapping at people, if you kick the cat, whatever it is, be honest about it. Don't beat yourself up.
Mhm.
Acknowledge it, because you can't change something until you acknowledge it. I see many people, like I was saying, many employers will provide time management training for employees who are stressed out, because if they just manage their time better, then everything's going to be peachy keen hunky dory. Well, that's
Yeah.
just dealing with a symptom. It's not dealing with the root problem. It's like going to a doctor and saying, my leg hurts, and they put a Band-Aid on your knee, and then they realize that the bone's sticking out. It's like, oh, the Band-Aid's not going to help.
Yeah.
um, you have to be courageous to address the problem. And this is unusual for me to say, but be cautious who you share your burnout experience with. Because what I found in my recent research is that many people didn't support the individual when they were burning out, or worse, they were like, oh yeah, I went through that. And the participant whom I interviewed was saying, I didn't know they burned out. They never shared that with me. So it made them feel good that someone else had done it. Then it's all these questions. Why didn't I know?
And sometimes this person keeps telling you what you should do for your recovery as well.
Exactly. It worked for me, so it'll work for you. Well, it
Yes.
doesn't. And
Yeah.
that's what makes burnout recovery so difficult. I remember I talked to one practitioner who told me that she can cure burnout. Not
Oh, really?
kidding. Yeah. Cure burnout either in an individual or a large group setting in under an hour.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. I was like, "Okay." And I'm thinking residual burnout's going to happen, because I think that's what happens when people think they're recovered,
Mhm. Yeah.
and then they have this residual burnout. It's very unnerving. It's like, do I even know myself and what I'm in? And it causes more agita. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So that's basically how I've been, mitigating the stress. And that's not to say that I don't get stressed out with some things. Um, but I have a very good support network, and friends who I can tell anything to.
Yeah.
And the sad thing when I burned out was people who I'd known for 30 years, who I thought were like family to me, turned, absolutely turned. And it was difficult to let it go. But
Mhm.
there is something about letting it go that is very freeing and releases a lot of that stress. So it is a journey. But I do believe that organizational leaders do have within their power to make changes within the workplace, so that it's not as conducive to burning out their employees. It's a win-win-win. It's a
Yeah.
win for the employee, it's a win for the company, and it's a win for the clients.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. You're the
Yeah.
best.
Oh, you're wonderful. You're wonderful,
So
dear.
last
Oh, one more question.
question,
Okay.
because time flies and we're already over
I
the
know.
hour. But one last
Yeah.
question.
One thing I do want to say to the listeners, when we said that when we just talk on a Zoom call and not on a recording, we go 3 or 4 hours, I think you now see why we can go 3 or 4
Yes.
hours.
So last question.
My dear.
What transformation do you see that can happen because of burnout on an individual level and collective level?
Okay. The big thing is on an individual level, I think it can lead to self-actualization. And one of the interesting things with self-actualization on Maslow's hierarchy is someone who is self-actualized, they're kind of in the zone, and they may not sleep as much. They may not have a lot of close friendships, but they're very happy. They're in their space, they're being authentic to them. You can't fake that.
Yeah.
But when you get into when someone's self-actualized, they can put those boundaries in place and not feel bad about it. It's like, if you don't like it, well, that's okay. I'm not angry at you, but this is what I have to do for me. That's very, very powerful. And I think in the collective, if you have an organization where people are all moving towards that self-actualization, that they're not sensitive to criticism, that they don't get upset and scream and argue, and I have to push my point even if it's not the best thing. There is the company is going to be more resilient. They're
Mhm.
going to be able to respond to changes and challenges in a more healthy way. And that ultimately means that they're going to be an employer of choice. So they'll be able to get high quality candidates who want to work for them. And they're also going to be a company or seller of choice, because there's a real trend. Thank you for all the millennials. That is, we don't want a company that just gives us a product. Do they have a social consciousness? So
Mhm.
social responsibility becomes a part of it. It's a different way of seeing the world. It's not as harsh, but it's not that, oh, we're little butterflies and, and snowflakes and we're going to melt. No, it's not that. You can still be very directed. You can still be very focused. You can still be ambitious, but it's not a compulsion.
Yeah.
And I think that employers fear that if it's not as this sense of urgency, that nothing will get done. I
Mhm.
disagree. When the sense of urgency goes out, but you have clearly defined goals, clearly defined deliverables, clearly defined deadlines, and you got some contingency plans in there, you can bob and weave and you can be more resilient to address the changes in the workplace. And I think companies are going to have to do that. I
Yeah.
mean, if they want to survive.
Yeah. My God, it's brilliant. The
Thank you, dear.
insight, the- and I am it was breathtaking, the insight of self-actualization, because I haven't phrased it like that, and I haven't seen it phrased like that.
Yeah.
So this is really remarkable, and I'm really thankful that you're sharing this with us,
Oh,
because
thank
this
you.
is really remarkable, and I'm going to start telling that to everybody, because I get obsessed with ideas and concepts, and I just go and spread it to everybody.
Well,
So that's what I'm going to do.
and let me throw one thing out. We're talking self-actualization, not society's definition
Yeah,
of your actualization.
exactly.
Because I see some people out there who is, you just need more and more and more and more. And I've seen some um, people who say, you have to excel in 12 areas of your life. Well, the human brain can't deal with 12 things at the same time. So my feeling is it's adding pressure. It's unachievable, but it's a great business model because people keep coming back because they
Yeah.
want more and more and more. I've said this basically my entire adult life. When you say yes to one thing, you got to say no to something else. And for people who believe in it, the more, more, more approach, they hate that because you should be able to have it all. Well, you can
Yeah.
have it all, but it's the all that you want, not what somebody else says. Not, we hear all the stories during holidays that the single woman who has a fabulous job, loves her job, comes home and the family's like, oh, that's nice you did that at work. So you dating anybody? You're not
Yeah.
getting any younger. When are you going to give us grandkids? That type of pressure. And it can be very difficult, but yeah, it's self-actualization, really being who you are, because I'm a firm believer that everyone has was placed here for a reason.
Yeah.
And I think when people are in the throes of burnout, that's what keeps them sane. I am here for a reason. I got to get rid of these blockages. I need to let go and just be so that I can do.
Wow. My goodness. Thank you so much. So
Oh, my
much.
pleasure, dear. Anytime, you know that. You know
It's
that.
it's amazing. It's always amazing to listen to you. And I think you who are watching live with us and who will be watching the recording version of this, thank you for your time and attention. They are immensely valuable to us. Our next panel in English will be tomorrow about coming back to work after a burnout at
Okay.
4:30 European time with the Cathy Man from South Africa. Dr. Geri also knows Cathy.
Oh,
We
yes.
have our own burnout network, burnout
Me too.
professional network. And she has come back to a full-time job after she had the burnout, and then she started working again. And she's talking about how it is, what she's been learning with this experience of coming back to a full-time job, rethinking everything she knows about stress and also burnout, and also about her own self-actualization. So I think it's going to be really interesting. If you want to request a participation certificate in Portuguese, or if you want in English as well, you can request, but this is the link that you can, the form is in English though. So I'm leaving the link in the chat. Help us spread the word about the Burnout Awareness Week. Share the event with your network. Use the hashtag Burnout Awareness Week on your networks. Help us raise awareness and fight stigma. The content we're sharing can be very useful to someone close to you. Please share this panel with everyone you know. And if you are a native English speaker, if you are not, it's always a good practice. So I really hope this content gets to as many people as possible because it is golden. I'll see you in the next panel. Thank you. Take care and
Bye,
see you
Carol.
there.